Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to week 6. We have a lot of math work to go over today, so just bear with me. I'm going to try to make sure that I go slow so that if you have any questions, concerns, when I was putting everything together, I tried to make sure that I broke it apart so that every time we get to a particular formula, we're going to actually go over the assignment or examples right then and there. And then, of course, I brought in some of your knowledge checks at the end, as well as some apply and reflect exercises that you will see. I also have the one that I did, and I'm going to work with you through a couple of them. Of course, not all of them, but just to show you what they're looking for when you guys go to answer the questions, because there's some actual ones that you have to type in. And if you don't type it in a certain way, even if your answer is correct, you won't get credit for it. And you'll understand what I mean when we get to the end and I go over it. So what are we doing today? We are, of course, doing our knowledge checks. Like I mentioned, we're going to look at our apply and reflect. All of this is going to help us for our weekly feedback. We are going over mortality rates and hospital autopsies and autopsy rates. And then we're going to wrap it up. But to get our minds right, to relax, to release, we're going to challenge our brain really quick. And instead of me kind of having you guess, I went ahead and put it up. How many digits does the value of pi have? The answer is infinite. Math is actually the language of the universe. So the more equations you know, the more you can converse with the cosmos. Just a little math trivia, just a little knowledge. Now let's get into chapter 6 and those mortality rates. With this, we're going to look at the rates for hospital, gross, net, in the operating room, anesthesia, newborn, fetal, cancer, case fatality. So we're going to be doing a lot of work today. We're going to look at general, regional, and local anesthesia. That's just talking about it. What's the difference? And then we're going to talk about direct obstetrical deaths versus indirect obstetrical deaths. So let's first get what mortality rates is out of the way. You can see on the thing that on the slide, it's telling you that it's a type of death, discharge, or disposition. In deaths of newborn, inpatients are included. Keep that in mind. In deaths of newborns, this is when we add the newborn in with our numerator. All discharges of newborn inpatients must be included in the denominator. So if we add them in the numerator, we also have to add them in the denominator. Patients who are dead on arrival, or DOA, are not included in the hospital inpatient mortality rate because DOAs, this is something that you may not know, are not admitted to the hospital. Yes, they may go to the hospital, they go straight to the morgue, but they're not admissions. Patients who die in the emergency department, something also to know, are not included in the hospital inpatient mortality rate because they too are not admitted into the hospital. Patients who die in the hospital while as an outpatient are not included in the hospital inpatient mortality rate. This is going to be extremely important as we go through working these problems. Fetal deaths are not included because mortality rates ordinarily are small. The calculations should be carried out, and we talk about 2 decimal places. So when you guys are doing your apply and reflect, if you do not have those 2 decimal places, it will not recognize it and it will not give you credit. I'm bringing that up because when I was working through the apply and reflect, I noticed it. And even though I saw the fine print, I was just going through and I was like, attention to detail. I have to make sure that I put those 2 decimal places in order for it to acknowledge my answers. It's a good idea also to put a 0 in front of the decimal. That was another thing that I noticed because I'm really quick about putting just one of the answers. The one we're actually going to do is 0.31% or 0.31. I did not put my 0. It did not recognize it. I went ahead and redid it again. And once I put the 0.31, it recognized it. All right. Why? Because this shows a casual observer that the rate is less than 1%. So we often, when we're going through these problems, we know that it's 0.31 or point blah, blah, blah. But we also have to remember that where is this coming from? Remember that the whole number is going to be to the left of that decimal. And that goes all the way back to session 1 in week 1 when we were talking about that, right? The whole number. So the whole number gives you that 1 and everything behind it, behind the period, you go forth. So just remember, if you are going to do these problems and you come up with a 0.031 and you're going to see that we multiply by 100 and then you end up getting 0.31, you're always going to put a 0 in front of that period. Okay. Now, the first one we're looking at, we're talking about mortality rates. Like I said, we have examples for each one. The hospital mortality rate is the proportion of inpatient hospitalizations that end in death, usually expressed as a percentage. Remember, we're doing 2 decimal places after that percentage, okay? So with your gross mortality rate, we're looking at the number of inpatient deaths, including newborns. So remember, if you are including newborns in the numerator, you have to include the discharges, including newborns, in the denominator. If a hospital has 7 deaths and 520 discharges, and I hope you guys have your calculators as we're going through this because it will help. You have 7 deaths and 520 discharges, including deaths for a month. What is the hospital mortality rate? And we're rounding to the nearest 10th. So we have our hospital mortality rate. You're going to put 7 deaths divided by 520 discharges. Like I said, I'm breaking these down, actually throwing in numbers, pulling things that we're going to actually have to use. 7 deaths divided by 520 discharges, 7 over 520. You should get 0.0134, but that's not going to be to the nearest 10th. Remember, we're always multiplying by 100. And once you, I
wish you could watch us.
Let me see if I can get my whiteboard. There's this new thing on here called whiteboard. I don't know if it's going to fly. Okay, probably not. So hospital mortality rates, just to recap, we took the 7 deaths, we divided it by the 520 discharges. When we're looking at gross mortality rate, we're including newborns, which means we're doing the newborns in the denominator as well. 7 discharges divided by 520, I'm sorry, 7 deaths divided by 520 discharges gives you 0.0134. But when you go to plug it in, you're multiplying 0.0134 times 100 to get the percent, which will give you 1.34. But we're looking at the 10th, which is that 3. The 4 is less than 5, so that we know it's 1.3%. Is everyone with me so far? I do not want to move on if you guys aren't comfortable, because I know that there's a lot of formulas in these 2 chapters, and we're going to go through each and every single one. This is being recorded, and I'm going to actually do timestamps for mortality rates, net mortality rate. Like each section is going to be timestamped so that when you are working through your assignments, you'll be able to go straight to that section and have kind of like a visual go through as you're going through it. Okay. Now that was mortality rates. Let's do case fatality rates. We're still in mortality rates, but we're looking at a different type of mortality rate. Now, for this one, we have 2 examples that I put up. Case fatality rate. This is the total number of deaths that are due to a specific illness, cancer, diabetes, I don't know, heart disease, myocardial infractions, maybe they died in surgery, okay? So when you see case fatality, just think of that case could be certain myocardial infarction is one we're going to do, or just regular case fatality, maybe we don't know, okay? The formula, number of deaths for patients with a disease during a period. That's the disease. It's going to be different than the total mortality because now we're wanting to look at a specific disease. We take that with the number of patients discharged with a disease, including deaths that are happening. So for our first example, for this particular formula, a hospital had 40 acute AMIs or acute myocardial infarctions. They were discharged, including deaths. Last year, and 8 deaths. What is the case fatality rate for AMIs? Also rounding to the nearest 10th. So we start off with, we're looking at our AMI case fatality rates specific to acute myocardial infarctions. There were 40 patients that had acute myocardial infarctions that were discharged, including your deaths. 8 of those were deaths. We take the 8 deaths divided by everybody that had an acute myocardial infarction, which was 40, and it gives us 0.2 times 100, because we're trying to get that 100%, letting us know that 20% of patients with AMI died from AMI, okay? That's not saying that everybody with AMI died, but 20% of those 40 actually passed away from an AMI. Any questions for so far? I know I'm stopping a lot. I just want to make sure y'all got it because I understand this is a lot. Open up the chat. Okay, I got the chat open. So if something does arise, I'm here. Okay. The second example, actually, it's the third example from the lecture. Now, the case fatality rate can also be used to examine the mortality rates by a physician. You have that doctor that for some reason, patients just, they're not making it with him. So in this case, Dr. Howard discharged 600 patients in the last year. Of those patients, 27 died, okay? For this one, we're looking at Dr. Howard specific. We're not talking about what they died of, but specifically to this particular surgeon, doctor, healthcare provider. We're going to take the 27 patients that died and divide it by the 600 total patients that he's discharged, because we want to know what's going on with Dr. Howard. And maybe we're looking at all of our doctors and we just have come up to Dr. Howard, all right? If you were to divide 27 by 600, you should get 0.0450 times 100, getting to the 10th power, which should give you 4.5%. All right. So this is case fatality rates. You're looking at specifics. Cancer. Let's say you've had 500 patients that were discharged with cancer. Of those 500 patients, 10 died. You take 10 divided by 500. I actually have to pull out my calculator really quick because my mind is like, there's so many formulas with this one. Okay, so 10 divided by 500 times 100, 2%. So 2% of that 500, right, have died of cancer. Okay. Now, with net mortality, we are looking at excluding deaths that were less than 48 hours. Okay, it includes newborns, but remember, we're already mentioned those, requested by various reporting or accrediting agencies. So sometimes they may come, let's say JACO may jump in, or joint commissions, almost messed up. Joint commissions may say, hey, we want a report that's just talking about this section of mortality, also referred to as institutional mortality rates. For this one, here's our formula. Number of inpatient deaths minus number of inpatient deaths within 48 hours of admission, okay? Divided by total number of discharges, including deaths, minus number of inpatients deaths within 48 hours. For this one, last month, community hospital had 250 discharges, including 9 deaths. 3 of the deaths were patients who were in the hospital less than 48 hours. Okay, keep that in mind. 3 of the deaths were patients who were in the hospital less than 48 hours. We're looking for the net mortality rate, and we're also rounding to the nearest 10th. So let's get this net mortality rate. What we do first, we look at the number of deaths. So the community hospital had 255 discharges, 9 deaths, but of the 9, 3 were less than 48 hours. So we know right off the bat, we got to subtract that 3. Then we look at the total number of discharges, including deaths, which is 255. And we're once again going to subtract those 3 of the deaths that were within the 48 hours. This will give you, I should have did it 9 minus 3, which will give you 6 over 252. You take the 6 divided by 252. Sorry that I skipped that step, guys. My brain sometimes just goes straight there. You'll get the 0.0238. Now for this one, you'll see that once you multiply it by 100, it actually becomes 2.38. We're going to the nearest 10th. With that, that 8 rounds that 3 to 4, because you remember the 8 is larger than 5, right? So 5 and above, you round up. 4 and below, you round down. So for here, 2.4%. I'm gonna leave that up so you guys can write it, and keep in mind, I am time stamping every single one of these sections, okay? So it's gonna be a lot of timestamps, but I really want you to have this as a reference because there's so many. All right, so that was your net mortality rate. The next one, now we're looking at, unfortunately, my realm, right? The operating room, post-operative mortality rates. These refer to the number of deaths occurring after an operation has been performed. Now, they're not saying that they're on the table. Fun fact, or it's not necessarily fun, but a fact. A lot of our tonsil and adenoidectomies, you don't normally hear them passing away on the table from bleeding. Usually it's elderly patients or older patients, and it can be anywhere from 24 hours to days after. And what happens is, let's say once their tonsils and adenoids are removed, there's so much surface space in our mouths, in our throat, that maybe there's a bleeder. And what happens is they slowly bleed, and it's not caught, so they can drown. Okay, just in case anyone wanted to know. We also call this surgical mortality rate. So for here, we're taking the post-operative mortality rate, total number of deaths within 10 days of a surgical operation in a period. So if you remember what I said, anywhere from 24 hours to a couple of days, this tells you right here, within 10 days of a surgical operation. We divide that by the total number of patients experiencing a surgical operation in a period. For this example, 123 patients were operated on in the cardiovascular clinic at a university hospital. 3 of those patients died within 10 days of their operation. So we know that there were 123 patients, and 10 of those patients passed away. What is the post-operative mortality rate for the cardiovascular clinic? Once again, we're rounding to 1 decimal place. We're trying to get the post-operative death rate. We start off knowing that 3 of the patients passed away, right? Within 10 days. So 3 of those patients passed away within 10 days. We had 123 patients. We take 3 patients, divide that by the 123. which will give you 0.0243. We want one decimal place. Remember that we multiply by 100. You can either put 0.0243 or better, 2.4. Once again, once we get everything out, this is actually 2.43. The 3 is less than 5. So we round down or keep it to 4, 2.4%. How is everyone doing? Is it overloading you guys right now? Or you're still trucking with me? Because we have a lot to go over.
It seems easy doing it with you, with just, one little scenario.
Yep.
But when you look at the chart.
Yes, I pulled up the chart too. We will be doing the chart.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to be doing the chart. I already have it pulled up on my other screen, ready to go once we get the basic out of the way, like just the lecture. Okay, still talking about those postoperative mortality rates, just more information. We look at surgical operations, one or more surgical procedures performed at one time, any single or separate systematic process upon when the body that can be completed in itself. So sometimes in the operating room, we'll have a patient and they may have multiple surgical procedures. It's normally performed by a physician. We have dentists. They like to be called oral maxillofacial surgeons, or any other licensed practitioner. And they can be performed either with or without instrumentation, just depending on what we're actually doing. And that's okay. That's why I'm going to be making sure that you all get, and I know I keep emphasizing that I'm going to be time stamping it, but I really want you to be able to just go through these timestamps, especially when we cover the apply and reflect. Now, just like with postoperative, we still do anesthesia. We're looking at the ratio of deaths caused by anesthetics during a period to the number of anesthetics being administered. Because anesthesia deaths can occur so infrequently, like it is very rare, right? Some hospitals may choose to evaluate the relationship between what was going on with the patient to the specific anesthesia. You do have a question about the 3 major types of anesthesia. We have general, where we put the entire body to sleep. Regional, where we remove the ability to feel any pain or sensations in a specific region of the body. Those of you that have had babies, when we get our spinals or an epidural, those are different examples of regional. And then local are going to be numbing a small area of the body. When we do toenail removals, we'll numb around that particular digit so that we can take out that part without numbing a whole lot. Okay, so general, the whole body. Regional, think of spinal, epidural, and then local, right at the area where we're going to cut. Okay, so here's the formula for anesthesia mortality rates. Total deaths caused by an anesthetic agent. Total divided by total number of anesthetics that are going to be administered. Here's our example. If anesthetics were given 2,000 times to a surgical patient or surgical patients, and 1 patient death was attributed to anesthesia during the past year. So for a whole year, 2,000 patients going through, but we only had 1 death. What is the anesthesia mortality rate? Round to the nearest 100th. Or here we are now looking at 2 decimal places and reported as 1,000 anesthetics administered. So for our anesthesia mortality rate, we only had 1 death per 2,000 times the patients received some type of surgical anesthetic. That gives us 0.00050. Once we multiply by 100, you get 0.050. I added the extra percent, but it's actually 0.05. But there would be a 0 behind that. So that's what you would write. Okay. And Like they said, because these are so infrequent, the numbers are probably going to be small compared to the amount of patients receiving some type of anesthetic agent. All right. Okay. Now, it also said once we round to the nearest 100th, we are going to report it as 0.5 per 1,000. Okay. And you didn't have any of these questions. I didn't see any on your, this particular one on your weekly quiz or your feedback. I did not see one, or your apply and reflect. Now we're going to get into maternal mortality rates. This is the death of any woman for any cause related to aggravated, that is aggravated by pregnancy or the management of their pregnancy, regardless of, as you see, duration or site of pregnancy, but not from an accidental or incidental cause. Meaning these are not going to be from like a motor vehicle accident or blunt trauma. It's going to be different management issues that were going on. An example of an accidental death could occur in motor vehicle accident or a fall, right? As you can see, we do have direct versus indirect obstetric death. A patient died from a C-section because of a nick to the uterine artery, which resulted in a hemorrhage. This does happen, unfortunately. That's direct, like cause and effect. We have indirect obstetric death, where it's not directly due to the obstetric case, even though the psychological effects of pregnancy are partially responsible for the death. Diabetes would be an example of that. When the rate is computed, hospitals usually classify only direct obstetric deaths, meaning the woman came in, they, for whatever reason, something happened in the operating room during a cesarean or whatever, and they passed. That's when they actually count them. Prepartum, occurring prior to childbirth. A patient comes into the hospital in labor but does not deliver and is discharged home, that they count those. We look at postpartum, occurring after childbirth. Patient comes into the hospital after delivery, maybe they had an infection or, at the C-section site. Okay, so those coming back in. Why is this important? Well, the researcher used this particular vital statistics for public and health policies to kind of change things, to make sure things that weren't working, we can kind of fix it and, help with the quality of patient care. They may use 100,000 to determine how often something occurred for every 100,000 people. Okay, so we want to see how often it's occurring, where is it occurring, what team is involved. Maybe it's a particular team where patients are just not constantly coming back for infection. You're going to look at what's going on with that particular section. I said all that before we got into the actual formula. So for maternal mortality rate, typically reported per 100,000, since this again is a rare event, just like with anesthesia, this is also rare. We take the maternal mortality rate per 100,000, meaning we're going to do the number of maternal deaths in a period, divide that by the number of births in a period, and we're always going to multiply by 100,000. This is another one that I didn't see often, but it's really good to have this information, okay? All right. At University Hospital, a mother died from a hemorrhage immediately after delivery. The hospital's annual obstetrics and gynecology discharges are classified as delivered 4,782, aborted 297, not delivered, meaning they came in, they were pregnant, they were sent back home, 186. And postpartum within 42 days. So they counted a while. So the baby's born, they count all the way up until 46 or 42 days was 46. The number of live births during that period was 4,782. What is the maternal mortality rate? What is the OB case direct fertility rate? We're reporting the statistics to the third decimal now, okay? So for maternal mortality rate, we take 1 divided by 4,782. Remember, a mother, just one, a mother died from a hemorrhage. So this is where you're looking at all this information and you're deciphering, what am I pulling out? Well, here, a mother died immediately after delivery. You notice that there's no other mentions. So you have 1 divided by 4,782 equaling 0.0029. Reported as a percentage, you have your 0, because now we want to get it to a percentage, right? Before we can even get it to the 100,000. We multiply by 100 to give us 0.0209%. And since we want to go by 1,000s, we are taking the same number. So I'm showing you, or the book is actually showing you as well, when you want it just as a percentage, right? You're doing it 0.209. But we want it as per 100,000. So we are multiplying by 100,000 and we're writing it as, because this is a statistics, we're saying that for every 100,000 births, the potential is 21 dying from a hemorrhage immediately after delivery. Why is it important to be able to understand it? Because there's times where, depending on where you decide to go after graduation, you may be that individual that's actually reading these statistics and helping the facility understand what's going on, okay? So we started off with 1 death within every 4,782. But when we look at this, it's per every 100,000. So as we read this, we know that from 100,000, there's a potential for 21 per the information we have. 21 deaths per every 100,000 people. Okay. But we're not done. We still got to do the OB case fatality rate from that same information. Okay. So here we're taking that 1 death and we're adding all the numbers from the previous slide. We're taking the 4,782, the 186, the 46, try to make sure I don't miss anything out. The 4,782, I missed the 297, the 186, the 46. So now we're taking all the rest of the information, okay, by that 1 death. You should get, once you add everything up, 1 death divided by all the other information, which is 5,311, giving you 0.00188. Okay. Remember, you're either going to have it in a percent depending on what the statistics is, or 19 per every 100,000 individuals. Okay. You're probably wondering, I see 0.00188. Well, remember, we're rounding up. Once we get to our decimals, it should be 0.0188. Rounding up, 8 is larger than 5, gives you 19. Or, like I mentioned, 19 per every 100,000. Okay, let's do another one. Next example. During the year, a community hospital reported 1,307 hospital live births and 2 maternal deaths after an abortion. What is the maternal mortality rate? Once again, we're reporting per 100,000, and I'm going to put individuals so that it kind of sinks in. So it's per every 100,000. Now, for this one, we're looking at the maternal mortality rate. They didn't ask for OB case fatalities. We're just looking at the maternal mortality rate. We know that during the year, there were 2 maternal deaths. So we're going to make sure that 2 is in our numerator. And the total hospital reported 1,307 live births. We take the 2 divided by 1,307, which will give you 0.00153. Reported as 100,000, we remember that we will multiply the 0.00153 times 100,000, which will give us 153.02, or 153.0 rounded to the nearest 10th. I just realized some of my stuff is, well, let me go back. Did everybody get this? Okay. So the following definitions apply to infant deaths. And this is important so you can kind of understand when you're looking at these different statistics, what they're actually talking about. When we look at newborn deaths, and I can tell you that this is a question in Apply and Reflect where you'll have to plug and play. You guys know where you match them. When we look at newborn deaths, death of a live born infant born in the hospital who later dies during the same admission. Neonatal death, death of a live born infant within the neonatal period, which is defined as the first 28 days of life. That's a neonatal death. Post-neonatal death, death of a live newborn infant from 28 days of birth to the end of the first year of life. So you're looking at the 28 days to when they become a 1-year-old. Infant death, death of a live newborn at any time from the moment of birth at the end of the first year. Newborn, neonatal, and postnatal deaths are all subsets of infant death. So think of it as a subcategory, within infant death. And then perinatal death, death that occurs from 22 weeks of completed gestation or 7 days completed to 7 completed days from the moment of birth. And this all came from the World Health Organization. All right. And like I said, there were questions that I saw on this. Now, here's the formula. Number of newborn deaths for a period. We have the number of newborn discharges, including deaths for a period. If a university hospital had 2,567 newborn discharges and 2 newborn deaths in 1 year, what is the newborn mortality rate? And we're rounding this to the nearest 100%. We're looking at the newborn, I don't know why I put new M, it's supposed to be NB, guys, mortality rate. We know that there were 2 newborn deaths within 1 year. So 2 is going to be our numerator. And there were 2,567 discharges, okay? 2 newborn deaths divided by 2,567 gives us 0.007. We want it to the nearest 100%. The biggest thing is you're looking at this 7.7. Once you get it, it's 0.077. The 7 has us rounding up because it is greater than 5, which means we're actually looking at 0.08%. I'm trying to make sure I go slow because I know I tend to talk fast. So I want to make sure that everyone is being able to kind of follow where I'm going. Okay. Now, we're doing all this because we're looking at statistics. They use this information for public health studies, for different policies to put into place. You also see that they frequently use it, birth certificate data for this information, okay? The next 2 formulas, Infant death includes both neonatal and perinatal deaths. All right. There is a table that I put up here to kind of give you the formal definitions of each of the terms. Actually, you guys already saw it. That was the table, but broken down from neonatal, perinatal, infant deaths. For these two, we have neonatal mortality and infant mortality rates. Formula is pretty much the same. You're just looking at neonatal or infant death. Number of neonatal deaths during a period divided by number of live births during a period versus number of infant deaths during a period divided by number of live births during a period. Here's our example. A hospital had 4,270 births, okay? 3 newborn deaths and 4,267 newborn discharges. Calculate the neonatal mortality rate. Express the answer as a rate per 1,000, round to decimal places. So I just want to emphasize that the formulas are pretty much the same. The only thing you're looking at different is, are we looking at neonatal or are we looking at infant? If you notice, everything else is pretty much the same. Here we're looking at neonatal, which is also a subset of infant. We know that there were 3 newborn deaths divided by 4,267 newborn discharges. Okay. So you'll see that there's 4,270. That's just letting us know how many births actually occurred. From that, 3 died and that left 4,267. So this is great information, just extra, letting us know that, okay, that's cool. We actually had 4 live newborn discharges. Once we divide 3 by 4,270, we will get 0.0070 expressed as a rate per 1,000. So we're looking at 0.0070 times 1,000 equals 0.70 per 1,000. So for every 1,000, there is a 0.70 mortality rate range. Okay. More information. So when we look at fetal mortality rates, the death is indicated by the fact that there was an expulsion, or extraction. The fetus doesn't breathe. Maybe other evidence that life, like the heart isn't beating. There's no pulsating in the umbilical cord. They are not included in any calculations of deaths, but calculated separately. That's important. Determination of whether to include fetal death data is going to be specific to a hospital. So you may get somewhere and they may not calculate it like you have used at another hospital because it's hospital specific and it requires an investigation of the facilities needs by maybe hospital administration or medical staff or any other reporting agencies. The biggest thing is that it's hospital specific, okay? Fetal deaths may be classified as early fetal death, less than 20 weeks gestation, intermediate fetal death, 20 weeks completed gestation, but less than 28 weeks, late fetal death, 28 weeks completed gestation. You may see these again, so it's good to kind of just be able to differentiate the 3, okay? Both intermediate and late fetal death constitute what is commonly termed as a stillbirth. Now, here's our formula. Number of intermediate and late fetal deaths for a period divided by number of live births and plus intermediate and late fetal deaths for a period. During November, a hospital had 207 live births, 1 early fetal death, 2 intermediate fetal deaths, and 3 late deaths. Okay, So with this, go back and remember what's involved in the fetal mortality rate. You will see that it's your intermediate and late. That's important because here you have one, it'd be easy to be like, oh, 6, but keep in mind, we're looking at intermediate and late, okay? What is the fetal mortality rate? Report the answer to the nearest 10th. We have your fetal mortality rate. Remember, I said we're not doing early, so that's that extra information, okay? 2 intermediate fetal deaths plus 3 late equals 5. Number of live births, 207, plus intermediate and late. So we're still adding that 5. So you have 5 divided by 207 plus 5 equals 5 divided by 212 equals 0.0235. But remember, if we want to round it as a percentage, you have 0.235 times 100 equals 2.35%, but we only want it to the nearest 10th. So that 5 rounds that 3 to 4, giving us 2.4%. Keep in mind that the denominator in the fetal mortality rate formula is not discharges, okay, y'all? But instead live births and intermediate and late fetal deaths. Recall or remember that the denominator of a rate should include the number of times an event could potentially happen. Fetal deaths are not a discharge, and therefore they have to be added to the denominator along with live births. Okay. Now, cancer mortality rate. We're going back to case fatality rates. Okay. Looking at case mortality, here we're looking at measuring the risk of death that's caused under study for a defined population. So we're looking at the number of cancer deaths during a period, number in a population at risk. Knowledge of healthcare statistics is especially important as a tool for these cancer registries. Any individual who's responsible for maintaining records and reporting information about cancer patients have to have a good foundation for this. Hospital cancer registrars are well developed and they're organized programs and hospitals that collect all the information about their patients that have cancer. It's important because we're trying to improve the treatment of cancer, knowing who has it, how we can get them taken care of. We're looking at the population, we're looking at regions, we're looking at those sections. What was the movie Erin Brockovich, right? Where here she had substantial evidence that, hey, something's going on in our area. Everyone's coming on that has, some type of issue, right? And so that particular movie, which was based on true story, was a prime example of how important knowing these rates are. So here's our example. In 2017, 599,108 people died from cancer in the United States. The estimated 217 US population at that time was 325,719,178. What we're doing is calculating the cancer mortality rate for the United States in 2017. We're reporting the answer as per 100,000 to the nearest 10th. Okay. So we have our US cancer mortality rate for 2017. We're being very specific because when we're looking at our statistics, we are looking for 2017, not 18, not 19, not 22. We're grabbing the information from this particular year. We're taking the number of cancer deaths in 2017, which is 599,108, and dividing it by the population at the time, 325,719,178. Okay, which should give you 0.0018393. But we are not done because they want us to report the answer as per 100,000 to the nearest 10th. So we take that 0.0018393 and multiply by 100,000, which we get 183.93. But we want to round it to the nearest 10th, keeping in mind that that last digit of 3 does nothing to our 9. So it's 183.9 per 100,000. I just didn't write the per 100,000. So for every 100,000, you could potentially have 183.9. Okay, and that's how you would look at that particular statistic. I know that was a lot. We still have one more chapter to get through, okay? Now, once 7 o'clock goes, I'm still going to keep teaching, but if you have to go, I completely understand. I know that I went a lot slower this time, but I really want y'all to feel comfortable with it, okay? So like I mentioned, we're at 6:51 now. I'm going to keep teaching and keep recording. So if you do have to go, don't worry. Like I mentioned, I will have timestamps for each and every single formula. So there's going to be a lot of timestamps, but that way you'll feel comfortable and you can just snap to each section. We're getting into autopsies and autopsy rates. We're going to look at corner cases. We're going to do just like we did with mortality, we're doing it with autopsies. And we're going to look at different software that is used to complete different spreadsheets. So what's an autopsy, right? What are we doing? It's performed a lot of times for educational purposes, but sometimes we have to gather information. You know, maybe forensics has to get in and we're trying to determine that what's going on with this death. You know, it's not natural causes. We're trying to rule out foul play. So some small hospitals honestly don't have a morgue and the body can be removed to an off-site or a funeral home. Not every hospital has a morgue. I don't know if most people knew that. What is our gross autopsy rate? This is the rate or the ratio during any given period of time that of all inpatients. There is a question that I saw on your Apply and Reflect that's talking about inpatient autopsies to all inpatient deaths. The rate is customarily reported as a percentage. Newborn autopsies are included in gross autopsy rate. This is very important. They may be calculated separately as determined by your medical staff committees. So, number of autopsies, inpatient deaths, including newborns, right? Divided by number of inpatient deaths for a period. So, for this first one, during January, University Hospital discharged 1,027 patients. The hospital had 32 deaths, including newborns, and performed 11 autopsies. Calculate the gross autopsy rate and round to the nearest 10th of percent. Your gross autopsy rate, we have 11 autopsies divided by 32 deaths. Gives you 0.03435. Round to the nearest 10th of a percent. If we want the percentage, you're looking at 34.375. 10th of a percent, 5, the 7 makes that a 4, 34.4%. Net autopsy, slightly different. Then this is the ratio given for all patient and inpatient autopsies to all inpatient deaths minus anything that's unautopsied. You have a patient that's coming in, they passed away, but the autopsy was not done for whatever reason. Or if it's a medical examiner's case, you pull those out. There are certain type of deaths that are reportable. So when we look at a coroner's death, it could be physician or non-physician who can kind of determine that the death is unattended, it was violent or unexplained death. They're going to pull those out because now more has to be done, so we don't include it yet. The term coroner comes from an Old English corno, which means crown, and a coroner was appointed in the English crown. So in some parts of the country, a coroner is called the medical examiner, the ME. They are synonymous to each other. There was a question like that on your either knowledge check, you may see that one, or your apply and reflect. So you can either hear it coroner or ME, and that's just a physician specializing in pathology or forensic medicine, okay? Let's get into the formula. Total autopsies or inpatient deaths for a period divided by total inpatient deaths for a period minus, remember, we're moving out those cases we aren't going to have to deal with right now for whatever reason, by a coroner or an ME. Here's our example. During April, community hospital had 14 patient deaths and 3 autopsies. 1 body was released to the county coroner for autopsy. So we already know that one of these bodies is coming out. Calculate both the gross and net autopsy rates, round to the nearest 100th of a percent. We're going to start with the gross autopsy rate. We have our 3 autopsies divided by our 14 deaths. Okay, we're not doing the net yet. We're just doing gross, just trying to figure out what's going on. Gives us 0.21428, round to the nearest 100 of percent. To convert a percentage, we know that it's 23.076. We want the nearest 100th. Remember, this is tenths, hundredths. That's 6, rounds that 7 to an 8. So now we have 23.8%. For our net autopsy rate, looking at the same information. However, this time we take those 3 autopsies divided by the 14 patients minus that 1 patient that we sent to the coroner. Here we're getting 0.23076. And you'll notice that they're the same. And that's just because of how the numbers are. The net autopsy rate will always be greater than or equal to the gross autopsy rate. So when you're doing these problems, and if you see something that says calculate both the gross and your net is less than, go back and recalculate, because this net is always going to be greater than or equal to, okay, the gross autopsy rate. When we're doing inpatient autopsies, these are going to be performed on the body of an inpatient who died in the hospital. Emergency patients, outpatients, home health patients, others that have been former patients. When we look at the guidelines, because depending on where you're at, usually hospital autopsies are performed by a staff pathologist. Normal hospital autopsies are performed in the hospital. This is the only case where outpatients are included within the statistics, okay? Fetal autopsies, very important, are not included in hospital autopsies rates. When we look at the adjusted autopsy rate, now we're taking proportions performed by the deaths of patients whose bodies are actually available. They're in the morgue, we can grab them, we can autopsy them. Patients whose bodies are available for autopsies include inpatient deaths. Maybe the pathologist has decided, you know what, an autopsy while acting, they're doing it as they are a coroner as well. It can include the number of deaths in the denominator or the adjusted hospital autopsy rates, okay? Just adjusting to find out what's really going on. These are patients that their bodies are actually available. That doesn't mean they've been done yet, they're just available. We have the number of, and we have the number of hospitals, autopsies, divided by the number of bodies that are actually available for an autopsy. Our example, community hospital has 260 discharges in June, 7 were deaths. The hospital pathologist performed 3 of the autopsies during this period. 2 home health care patients and 1 outpatient died and were brought to the hospital for autopsy. Calculate the adjusted autopsy rate. Express the rate as a percentage round to the nearest 10th. Here, we are going to take the 3 autopsies plus the 2 home healthcare patients and the 1 outpatient that died. We're going to divide it with the 7, and then we're going back to the 2 and the 1 for, healthcare patients and the outpatient that died, giving us 6 over 10, right? 3 plus 2 plus 1 is 6. 7 plus 2 plus 1 is 10. 0.600, the nearest 10th, we're looking at 60%. When you multiply it by 100, you get the 60.00, but we only want the 10th, 60%. All right. The next one is newborn autopsy rate. We're actually almost done, guys. Newborn autopsies for the period divided by total newborn deaths for the period. Community hospital had 33 births during the month of June with 2 newborn deaths. One of the newborns died shortly after birth and was autopsied. Now we want to know the newborn autopsy rate, and we're looking at where we're going to, and it's the 10th. I can't stress that when you guys are going through your work, make sure you're looking whether it says tenths, hundreds, thousands, because that's where you're going to know how many decimal places to go. Newborn autopsy rate. You have 1 of the newborns died, so that gives us our 1. Where there were only 2 newborn deaths, giving you 0.50, rounding to the nearest 10th, convert to a percentage. We know that 0.50 times 100 is 50%. Okay, so of the 2 deaths, only 1 was autopsied. Now, fetal autopsy rate. Autopsy performed on intermediate and late. Remember, these are different. Intermediate and late fetal deaths for the period divided by total intermediate and left and fetal deaths. So here's our example. University Hospital's newborn service reported 10 fetal deaths for quarter 2. Too early, 6 intermediate, and 2 late. Of these, the 2 late fetal deaths and 1 intermediate fetal death were autopsied. Remember, we're doing autopsy rates now. Apply the formula to calculate the fetal autopsy rate and round to the 10th percent. The number of intermediate and late fetal deaths, 6 intermediate plus 2 late equals 8. Number of autopsy performed on intermediate and late fetal deaths, 1 intermediate plus 2 late equals 3. So I went ahead and kind of wrote all that out so that now let's get the rate. We have the 3, 2 late plus 1 intermediate divided by the 8, which is 6 intermediate plus 2 late, gives us 3 over 8. Once we divide that, we get 0.375. Convert it to a percentage. 0.375 times 100 equals 37.5%. We are rounding to the 10th, which is the decimal place right after or directly to the right side, which gives us 37.5%. Here are all the formulas, okay? But we have broken them down so that when we went through our autopsies and as well as our mortality, we worked the problems out as we looked at the formulas. So what I have now is your apply and reflect. Knowledge check. I'm gonna throw out the feedback or the discussion forum for those who are watching the playback. I'm not giving it yet. You're gonna stay and watch with the rest of us, but I do have it for you. So now, one of the things y'all mentioned was when we were doing the apply and reflect, it's a lot different when you have all the information just right there in front of you, right? Everything's there, and now you're deciphering, okay, what am I pulling out? So for this apply and reflect, I grabbed a couple of the questions that were there and we're going to work them out together. Now, I don't have a split screen, so just keep in mind, I'm pulling the information from this particular chart, okay? Using the data, I have to look over here. Using the data reported below for the past year, perform the calculations requested below for the following questions. Remember to use leading zeros if applicable and round these to 2 decimal places. Keyword 2 decimal places, okay? First is the gross mortality rate. From the information, the gross mortality rate was 49. We took 13,954, which was the total adults and children discharges. And we added that to the 1,965. I'm gonna try not to make you dizzy, but I kind of want to show you where I'm getting the information from. From total newborns, 1,965, because we're doing all of the deaths, right? Which gave us 49 divided by 15,919. Once you've calculated that, you should get 0.00307 times 100. Remember, we're looking for 2 decimal places, right? 0.307 is your answer, but that's not 2 decimal places. The 7 is greater than 5, which means your answer rounded to 2 decimal places is 0.31 or 0.31%. For this particular section, make sure you put the 0 before your decimal place. This is when this is the one that I was working on, and I was like, I got the right answer, but because I didn't have that 0 in front, make sure you put the leading 0 before your decimal place as you go through this particular section. The next one, the net, and these are, we are doing your apply and reflect.
Back when that one, where did you get the 49 at?
Okay, so the 49 came from total adults and children, 48 plus total newborns is 40.
Okay.
49.
Okay, so the
discharges and deaths. We're looking at discharges and deaths.
Yeah.
48 plus 1. Great question. The next one, now we're looking at the net mortality rate. Okay, 35. I'm trying to keep going. I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. But now we have our 35. Trying to remember where I got everything from. Net mortality divided by your 15,905. So we had to subtract the 14. Okay, 48 plus 1 minus 14, right? 49 minus 14 is your 35. 13,954, 1,965, still subtracting the same. Remember, everything less than 48 hours, we do not add it. Oh, my nose is running. Gave us 15,095, okay? And it's easy because we know there's 14. If you think of this one, we just subtracted 14 here, 14 there. Gave us 0.022 because we do not want anybody that was less than 48 hours. Times 100 gives you 0.22005. 2 decimal places, right? Rounded to two decimal places. Once again, 0.22 or 0.22%. The computer will read either one of these two. Okay. Cancer mortality rate. Now, sorry, I did that too fast. Now we're just looking at one section. We are looking straight at our cancer. So we know that there are 53 cancer deaths divided by 565. Where did I get that information? There were 565 patients discharged with a primary diagnosis of cancer. Okay. We take the 53 divided by the 565, giving us 0.938 times 100 equals 9.380. Rounding 2 decimal places, right? giving us 9.38. Remember that 0 is less than 5, does nothing to the 8. 9.38 or 9.38%. Okay. I did another example for you guys straight from the apply and reflect. This is apply and reflect. Here's another one of the charts that you will see. Here, we'll check on the gross autopsy rate, or I'm sorry, we're looking at the newborn autopsy rate. This one's a little easier because you can see everything in front of you. We have 2 newborn autopsies divided by 3 of the deaths, giving us, and I really hate this number, y'all, 0.666 times 100, right? Giving us a 66.7%. 2 decimal places, 66.70. Okay, I just put it as percent, but paying attention to the 2 decimals, 66.70%. Did I do another one? I think I did another one. What is the net autopsy rate? 23 adults and children divided by 87, okay, equals 0.2643%. 26.42. So this is the one I was telling you about that we're checking the math. The options is 26.42, 0.2642, et cetera, But if you divide 23 by 87, you actually get 0.2643, which would give you 26.43, not 42. But just keep in mind that you won't see 43. I haven't corrected it yet. So you'll see 26.42, okay? Now for your knowledge checks, we're just gonna go through them, okay? Because I know y'all are probably like, oh my gosh, brain overload. 2 knowledge checks and then we're out, okay? So here's one of them that you should see. The hospital had 7 deaths and 520 discharges, including deaths for a month. What is the hospital's mortality rate? Round to the nearest 10th. And then you'll see 1.1, 1.3, 1.4, 1.2. These are your options, okay? Correct answer is 7 deaths divided by 520 discharges gives you 0.0134 times 100, gives you 1.34. Keyword, nearest 10th. So that 4 does nothing to the 3, 1.3%. Correct answer, 1.3%. Okay, next one. During the last semi-annual period, University Hospital had 6,234 discharges and 18 deaths and 15 autopsies. What is their gross autopsy rate? Report the rate as a percentage rounded to the nearest 10th. The options that you should see: 81.0%, 83.3%, 80.0%, or 82.0%. Correct answer, 83.3%. But how did we get there? 15 autopsies divided by 18 deaths equals 0.833. Multiply that by 100, gives you 83.3%, rounded to the nearest 10th. That's how we get 83.3%. Now, if you've made it this far to the playback, thank you. For those of you that stuck with me, thank you, thank you, thank you. We went over the math trivia. We talked a lot about mortality rates and hospital autopsies. We did a preview of your apply and reflect and your knowledge check. For those of you watching the playback, if someone gave you $20, what would you buy with it and why? Our math trivia was how many digits does the value of pi have, and it's infinitive. Math is the language of the universe. So the more equations you know, the more you can converse with the cosmos. This is our wrap up. Are there any questions or concerns? Questions, concerns? How do you feel, Miss Julie?
I feel like it's going to be challenging. So going over the chart and the apply and reflect, that really helped, because when I was looking at all those, and I was doing it at work.
Mhm, mhm.
So I'm on my iPad and I have the chapters opened as well as the knowledge check. So not, and I keep flipping back.
Mhm.
And then I write formulas down and I switch back to the question. And then I look at the chart and you kind of cleared it up a little more. So, but I think it's just a matter of getting all the numbers where they need to go.
And time stamping. So as you guys, I can't stress, as you guys are doing these, give me some time because it's going to take me time just to make sure I timestamp each one, but it will be up tonight. It may be up a little bit later because there's a lot of formulas, as you guys know. But once the timestamps are up, you guys will be able to go straight there as you're studying. Okay. And moving forward, it does get a little bit more challenging. So you'll see me doing a lot more apply and reflect like we did tonight. Hopefully not going to make it as long, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we are providing you guys with the most information possible. So thank you guys for sticking it out. Definitely. Antoine, how do you feel? I see you just said a lot of studying over the, okay, just got some studying to do, but going over the, awesome. And I'm going to continue to do that for the next couple of weeks. Well, until the end of the module, we'll definitely continue to go over apply and reflect.
So on the in the book, if you go like to make note cards,
Mhm.
Can you print those out then?
You should be able to. What I've been doing, I have the paper book, which I have to send back soon because I rented it. But on the electronic version, I'll do a lot of like copy and pasting the formulas and different stuff, and then I print those out for myself. But you should still be able to, and don't quote me, you may have to kind of play with it, but you still should be able to print out the highlighted and anything that you grab.
Okay, so I'm handwriting all this stuff and I don't need to be.
No, you do not. You can copy and paste.
Okay.
So, do you have a Mac or PC?
I have both. I have a
Okay,
Mac.
so
Yeah.
and a PC. So I use my Mac mainly when I'm doing my math computations and when I'm looking at the ebook. And what you do is you'll, highlight it and don't try to copy and paste it that way. Let the drop box come up to say copy, let it copy that way, and then you can put it wherever you want. So you'll notice that during the lecture, a lot of the information, like a lot of the formulas, is the ones I actually screenshot as opposed to copying and paste. So I was able to copy this one. You see how it's like a lot brighter, it's not as dull, versus when I snapped it, like actually doing the screenshot. So just something that I'm learning. It's easier for me to kind of just either type it out on the, when I'm going through different examples, because this looks a little grainy, but yeah, it will work for you.
I don't remember on the PowerPoint because I started on the PowerPoint and I didn't go through the whole thing because I just didn't feel like I was getting the information there. But the formulas aren't on the PowerPoint, are they?
The formulas, no, I noticed that. So when I went back through, as you can see, I went through and grabbed the examples and the formulas and corresponded it to with each one. And if you want, I can actually upload my PowerPoint that I updated to as well, and announcements for y'all. So you'll have that as well. So you don't have to keep writing for the next couple of weeks. I can definitely do that. Let me write that down.
Well, I'm going to start doing the copy and paste. I do most of my work when I'm at work. I do most of my schoolwork when I'm at work because I have a lot of time there.
Well, I'm gonna what I'll do for y'all, I usually work on these, like I do them a week before. So once I'm done working with week 7, I'm gonna go ahead and you know how you can have the study note PowerPoint, so you guys can write your notes that way. So I'll start doing that, and then that'll actually help too. So you don't actually have to write, but you can write down extra notes next to it. So this one we already went through, but that's not a problem since I'm going over it anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that'll be on the PowerPoint, right?
Yes. Yes. So
Okay.
wherever you see here, I think it's just X's, right? On the PowerPoint, you'll
Mhm.
actually see the formula and the examples that are provided.
Okay,
Okay.
yep,
All right, y'all. It's 7:20. I don't want to keep you any longer. Thank you,
Yeah,
Antoine.
and
Thank you. And Antoinette, I know she stuck it out too for as long as she could. Thank y'all. Give me some time. This will be up tonight. Okay. I just gotta go through and do those timestamps for y'all.
okay,
All right. Have a good night, y'all.
thanks, good night.
Good night.